Pronto, então vamos começar. Espero que toda a gente consiga ouvir. Eu sou Gabriela De Angeli, sou coordenador da linha de investigação, Diferenças Italianas, e é com muito prazer que dou as boas-vindas aos colegas, às colegas, aos senhores e às senhoras, e à professora Elettra Stimilli. Eu vou fazer a minha breve introdução em português, depois, se calhar, passando a palavra, vou dizer umas coisas também muito breves em inglês. A professora Elettra Stimilli vem da Universidade della Sapienza em Roma, não sei se alguém tem alguma experiência com a Universidade della Sapienza. A Sapienza é uma cidade, é uma universidade maior da Itália, são não sei quantas dezenas de milhares de alunos e de alunas, e já só o impacto visual é espantoso. A La Sapienza, há uns anos, agora não estou muito bem na parte das estatísticas das universidades italianas, mas há uns anos La Sapienza era 1/6 do sistema universitário italiano. Como dizer que, pronto, se um aluno, uma aluna de cada 6 estudava a La Sapienza em Roma. Enfim, é uma coisa enorme. A professora Elettra Stimilli, agora vou dizer uma coisa, se calhar um bocado uma distorção do perfil da professora. Nós temos um interesse em comum, que é a dívida, que são as obras através das quais conheço melhor o perfil, a história da investigação da professora Elettra, porque eu próprio, depois da crise do euro, comecei a estudar questões de políticas monetárias e de política económica da União Europeia, e são livros que vale a pena ler, escritos de um ponto de vista mais filosófico do que... E é relativamente raro que haja filósofos ou filósofas, houve alguns ou algumas, especialmente da escola anglo-saxónica analítica, que se ocuparam do tema com resultados diferentes, às vezes interessantes, mas que nunca se ocuparam, digamos assim, da dimensão mais propriamente humana, de uma certa forma existencial, do problema da dívida. Esta foi mais uma área explorada por pessoas vindas do ambiente da Europa continental. A comunicação de hoje não tem nada a ver com este assunto, tem a ver com os corpos, com meios políticos, bodies as political means. Muito prazer tê-la aqui, senhora professora Elettra. Okay, this was my brief introduction in Portuguese. I don't know if I need to say anything, maybe more encompassing in English. Maybe not, since I see that our audience today comes entirely from either the Italian or the Portuguese language area. The term doesn't exist in English, Sprachraum, okay, sorry. Okay, anyway, so I just pass the word on to our dear colleague Gianfranco Ferraro, who will say some words of commentary after Elettra Stimilli's talk. So Gianfranco, if you want to say something yourself, please be at ease.
Boa tarde a todos os presentes, também que nos está a seguir à distância, e é com, devo dizer, imenso prazer também que acolhemos aqui no Centro de Estudos Globais e, em particular, nesta nova linha de investigação sobre o pensamento italiano, que, pronto, foi absolutamente recém-criada, a nossa amiga e professora Elettra Stimilli, que do pensamento italiano dos últimos anos, sem dúvida, é uma das investigadoras, das pensadoras e das filósofas que mais que mais contribuiu. E há muito tempo, também devo confessar, também partilhávamos ontem com Giovanni Tusa, que está conosco, e outros amigos, há muito tempo também que este convite tinha sido feito à Elettra. Esperemos, obviamente, que muitos mais haja daqui para frente. E, portanto, depois de 2 anos de pandemia, depois de um mundo global que foi avançando, não sem fraturas e não sem crises, conseguimos, graças também à grande contribuição de muitos investigadores deste centro, do diretor José Eduardo Franco, conseguimos finalmente dar vida a esta pequena comunidade também de investigação, em que há também espaço para compreender quais podem ser as contribuições que o pensamento italiano contemporâneo, mas não só contemporâneo, pode dar para a compreensão do nosso mundo global e também das formas de globalizações que houve até aqui. E sem dúvida, como já antecipava o Gabriele antes de mim, sem dúvida uma das questões que Elettra enfrentou nos últimos anos, quer dizer, a questão da dívida. Aqui temos um dos livros principais e quero também explicitá-lo porque tem uma tradução inglesa, the Debt of the Living, il debito del vivente, que foi sem dúvida um dos livros que mais impacto teve nos estudos dos últimos anos, e sem dúvida a questão da dívida é um dos elementos que também afeta de muitas formas as culturas e a geopolítica mundial. Para além, obviamente, da questão da filosofia, embora a filosofia, digamos, para além de autores como Nietzsche e como Benjamin, pouco, digamos, estudou esta parte. Elettra foi, sem dúvida, quem deu uma contribuição maior, portanto, não simplesmente para a compreensão da dívida em si, mas através da dívida para a compreensão das formas humanas que uma certa atitude da dívida construiu o definiu. Sem mais demora, vou dar a palavra a Elettra, que hoje vai apresentar uma comunicação do título Bodies as Political Means em inglês. Depois haverá uma conversa entre nós e uma conversa também aberta ao público, quer presencial, quer à distância, eventualmente, que poderá ser sem problema, quer em inglês, quer em italiano, eventualmente com tradução. Dispenso, Elettra, de falar em português. Pelo menos em poucos dias, é complicado. Mas, bom, so I give the word to Elettra, and once more, thank you for having accepted our invitation. So it's we are sincerely grateful for staying here, and we are ready to hear you about bodies as political means.
So it is really a pleasure to be here. I would say really thank you to Gianfranco. He's a very, very good friend of mine, but also a very good reader of mine. One on the most important. So we had an important relationship, intellectual relationship, and then it is really a pleasure to be here to have part to this occasion. So the aim of my talk today is to develop some reflections on the role of bodies as political means. This is a question that I discuss in my last book, that the title of this book is precisely Philosophy of Means for a new political of the bodies. And I will develop some reflection about this issue, starting from two contingent and somewhat related phenomena. On the one hand, with the predominance of the neoliberal policies, it is evident how managerial logic has prevailed for decades in the political agendas of hegemonic countries. This logic is substantially aimed at the organization of means, rather than the definition of purposes that give meaning to their use. One only has to think, for example, of the transformation of major welfare services in managerial issues, from public education to health care, in which administrative decisions dominate over political choices. Think also of the technocratic vision of a certain kind of green economy, which many governments promote instead of addressing policy issues related to environmental problems. The recent call for regulations in such a pervasive field as artificial intelligence, involving its use in crucial domains as politically and socially diverse as education, labor, justice, welfare, medicine, and cultural in industry. The most disturbing aspect here is that the demand comes from some people who have invested enormous economic resources into the field and are therefore concerned with the regulatory structure, not conflicting with the investments they have made. This process has led to a real disintegration of politics and the enormous difficulty in which many countries find themselves in facing the prevalence of populist instances. However, the second phenomenon on which I would like to focus is this. Many movements have emerged and manifest a new, effective political force with different practices and theories through a cross and intersectional mobilization in which bodies are on the agenda as real political means. From the United States to South America, Europe, many North African countries, and the Middle West since the Iranian women's rights revolt. My aim then is to create a link between two seemingly unrelated phenomena, starting with the role that the means have assumed in the discourse by which the West has asserted its dominance over the world, particularly regarding the philosophical elaboration of Western rationality. First, I cannot fail to notice how, in philosophical discourse, reason is the protagonist of the dynamics within which means are defined and as such acquire meaning. In this definition, the body is in fact excluded, just as specific activities, those in which the body is involved and from which the means themselves originate, are related invisible. Rather, attention is directed towards the rational forms of acting, which are specific field and hierarchically defined according to ends. The distinction between technical operations, work, and action characterizes much of modern philosophical discourse and goes back to Aristotle's separation of poiesis and praxis. A secondary role is assumed through the Western philosophical tradition, which is rather interested albeit in different forms and ways, in the identification of either ends, as in the case of Aristotelian finalism, or in Immanuel Kant's teleological judgment, or like the Hegelian dialectic, in which means turn out to be the focus of the mediation process, always aimed at a synthesis and thus at overcoming them. It is especially in the aftermath of World War II that a radical critique of instrumental rationality was created to contrast the pervasive dominance of pragmatic reason. In particular, some of the leading exponents of Jewish origin German philosophy, such as Adorno and Horkheimer, exiled to the United States due to the Nazi persecution, came to terms with the contradictions of Western thought after the horrors of the Shoah. The greatest difficulty in which these authors have found themselves in the attempting to identify a meaningful horizon for the human condition, transcending the functional ends posed as the predominant need, is criticizing the utter meaninglessness of irrational premises on which the meaning is seemingly uniquely based. This is the famous question of civilization as rationalized irrationality, brought into focus by Adorno and Horkheimer in the dialectics of enlightenment. One of the most relevant issues addressed by some of the most prominent theorists of neoliberalism that cannot fail to abstract attention is specifically related to the need to overcome the impasse into which European culture fell with Nazism, with the irrational developments intrinsic to Western civilization itself. These include Ludwig von Mises, author of the book Human Action, who looks with particular detachment at the German Jewish intelligentsia that emigrate like him in the United States. The biggest problem for him is that these authors attempt to address the demise of the human with the dominance of technology, through which a critique of instrumental reason, like that of Horkheimer and Adorno, for example, ultimately nostalgically aimed, from his point of view, at redefining a meaning for human action. His idea, rather, is to refocus the very status of human action as separate from its ultimate meaning. This is the task of the praxeology, or general theory of action he developed. Praxeology, for Mises, is not concerned with the ultimate goals of human activity. Neither does praxeology have the question ultimate ends, but this is a quotation, only to study the means applied for the attainment of any end. This is a quotation of a text of Ludwig von Mises entitled The Treatment of Irrationality in the Social Science, a text of 1934. Praxeology is therefore explicitly defined by Mises as the science of mean, not of ends. This is also a quotation. This means not judging an action according to the criterion of rationality or irrationality. That is, according to the sensibility related to the ends or the appropriateness of means concerning predeterminate ends. In both cases, albeit in different ways, there is a tendency to focus on ends and not on means. On the contrary, the new theory of action is solely the science of means. This is the definition by Ludwig von Mises of praxeology. Following this logic, even market is not longer that of the classical liberal thought. It is not an environment governed by laws capable of achieving a perfect equilibrium in which commodities circulate without impediment. In praxeological logic, or catalaxy is the other definition adopted by Friedrich von Hayek, the market is rather an autopoietic process, which modifies the agents participating in it by integrating them. The issue in the neoliberal vision of the market is a spontaneous order, which eludes the alternative between natural and artificial. It derives rather from the effects of human action that, having nothing to do with classically understood action nor labor, has intimately to do with technical practice. At stake is an autopoietic process capable of self-generation without the need for external regulatory powers, whether those of state or the ethical ones. Market thus results from the effects of a pure kind of technology, a process of self-formation in which the life techniques of agent subjects flow into its self-constructive dynamic. Yes, the action involved in this process is not concerned with the meaning from which it is derived, nor does it revolve itself into a merely instrumental action in the classical sense. Rather, it is a form of means organization which does not address only the satisfaction of the body's physiological needs as natural and therefore as rational, and everything else as artificial and therefore as irrational. This is also a quotation of the text of the Ludwig von Mises. It is defined as a specific technique aimed at the preservation and improvement of life. Survival thus becomes a true art, requiring dedication and exercise and technique. Means previously subordinated in philosophical and political discourse to ultimate ends or instrumental purposes thus turn out to be central in praxeological logic to the enterprise that each person must make of his or her life. Markets economy aims to coincide with a real and living economy in which every action is an entrepreneur, according to the well-known definition of Israel Kirzner, another theoretiker of the neoliberal. politics. Broadening the spectrum of needs to desires and extending the forms of vague labor to underpaid or unpaid forms of labor has been and is the spontaneous order of the market. That form of entrepreneurial governance, which is based on systematic and cross-cutting modes of direction based on forms of self-control and techniques of self-conduct. The evaluation of self through individual performance incentives is what directs these practices in the market, thus becoming epicenter of entrepreneurial governance technique and in this form, sources of market stock, valuate stock. The self-technique at play functions as a performance technique in a competitive environment, such as that of the market. If praxeology is the science of means, the action to which this science refers exists within a context in which means always turn out to be scarce. We have not means, always. The resources are always scarce. For there to be action, according to praxeological science, means turn out to be, or must turn out to be, always insufficient, and resources can only be assessed as scarce. It can be said then that the market evaluation in the final analysis corresponds to constantly devaluing resources, human, natural, social, which thus prove to be scarce. Only in this form can they reproduce a spontaneous order, which is generated by the competition of its actors. An order which is self-reproducing through devaluing modes of extraction, but absolutely effective of the level of wealth accumulation. Praxeology is the logic of the market as a self-poietic process of value extraction in which the individual techniques of life converge into a single self-constructive dynamic of pure technology. But, in my opinion, the point is that the supposed automatism underlying this logic tends to jump up precisely where techniques are identified with dynamics related to the reproduction of life, where the preservation of survival never coincides with the mere preservation of the identical. This is the point. Reproduction turns out then to be the central node to be highlighted as an autonomous sphere of valorization, which does not directly increase capital, but is injected into it at the moment when developments in finance prevail over production and intensify technological processes in the economy. This coincides with enhancing dynamics, which make the adaptation of individual lives to global economic policies possible. But if reproduction is an autonomous domain of valorization in which capital today invests because it is functional for the dynamics in force. Investigating this domain can perhaps allow us to identify a terrain of contrast within a context that seems to dominate destiny. It is crucial to focus on the body. The body as an indispensable means of reproduction and care for life, thus indispensable political means in this sense. Philosophical male discourse has abundantly neglected the bodily dimension. The major problem turns out to be related to the difficulty of processing the body at the same time as a means of survival and care of life. From this point of view, it seems that considering the body as an instrument of a process in which natural life and technical dimension are identified may imply the risk of losing control by the soul or the mind of that dimension that is usually considered autonomous or superior. The point to be understood then is, from my point of view, what relating the bodily dimension to an element of a technical system entails. This is my proposal, inscribed in feminist studies and practices. In Marxist feminism, the sphere of reproduction is connected to forms of unpaid and so invisible labor. On the other hand, an American strand of feminist studies refers the reproduction of the moral sphere to the ethics of care. If, in the former case, the goal is to give political force to the work of reproduction that remained invisible for centuries, in the latter, at stake is the relational acting connected to the reproduction that can provide alternative paradigms. If we can say that care was for centuries the invisible domain of free labor, and today is the new value source paradigm for the market, it is fundamental to understand what kind of practice is at play here concerning labor and action, and what relationship this establishes with the bodies as its indispensable means. Nothing has been devalued and considered more devaluing than the practices of care, as the struggles for votes in domestic war waged by feminist movements illustrate in the 1970s. The political force of these struggles lies primarily in the fact that through them, the terrain of a historically determinate conflict was identified. Wage as a form of value attribution, not only as a goal to be achieved on the level of claiming equal rights, but above all, as a symptom of a possible and radical change in social, political, and gender relations. Domestic activities of household administration, devalued in the 40s era as forms of labor in the classical sense, emerged today as an entrepreneurial action paradigm appropriate to the neoliberal market as a spontaneous order. This phenomenon induces us to identify a new terrain of struggle in keeping with the times. I believe that transforming the political change of labor power identified by Marx on the means of production terrain into the political charge related to it is one of the most relevant political issues of our time. The importance for me is to focus care on the technical body's dynamics. This allows us to define tangential points between the social and the physiological that made it impossible to abstract the collective instance from its embodiment in individual, concrete, living conducts. On the contrary, in the catalytic model of the neoliberal market, the investment and the extraction of value take place precisely because individual techniques are inscribed within a scarcity and a competition order. In this way, the transformations implemented always serve its preservation, the preservation of the market. The market order, therefore, is spontaneous in the sense that it is generated through the organization of means, which are self-directed toward its to its preservation. The individual techniques take on a social profile, but are uniquely functional to the market establishment, of which they are integral parts. The underlying criterion of the order is continuously improving advantage. A relentless competition appropriately maintaining order, which neutralizes any conflict-oriented change, the neutralization of the conflict. Within this dynamic, preferences from which individual conduct originates are nothing but forced choices. Praxeology thus turns out to be a general theory of human actions. It is a comprehensive and totalizing form of social action aimed at synchronizing the all-compassing market order on every singular dimension, flattening the uniqueness and the complexity of the individual techniques that take part in it. The malleable time of strategy, uncertainty, and indecision, in addition to the lightning moment of imagination, which from the sensible life from which bodies originates, are thus completely neutralized. In this way, the space of reproduction as the domain of preservation has been assumed as the privileged field of value extraction. If it is a care that makes the body a social dimension, its placement within the capital valorization process is what makes it possible for the market to be the theater of a living economy in which reproduction coincides with the self-reproduction of spontaneous order itself. tracing dynamics of care back to the techniques of the body and underlying techniques of the body is to open a gateway to what, for all intents and purposes, appears to be the decisive political conflict of our time, involving bodies at the origin of social dynamics. 20th century philosophical thought has opened up an important cross-section for a radical rethinking of the body, which has its first imprint in the thought of Spinoza, then especially in Nietzsche. Nevertheless, feminism has made a decisive contribution in this direction, a radical elaboration of sexualization of a social practice arising from suffering bodies are subject to. Today, it is transnational and intersectional feminist movements that give political force to bodies as indispensable means of unexpected techniques. Reproduction is the social question at the heart of our time, involving what commonly empowers the living. The time has come to support bodies by engaging with the oppositions form at once individual and social, to contrast the dynamics in which individual lives are involved in the reproduction of the living economy, the basis of the spontaneous order of the market. Competition among living beings producing profit for only a select few is opposed by a mass of bodies as a common means of social reproduction. It is no coincidence that most of the recent claims made in different ways have been in the name of the body, in a global form, for its protection, health, shelter, nourishment, mobility, and expression, I think place precisely with through the body in its technical and infrastructural dimensions. When this happens, the body seems to rise at the same time at the means and the ends of politics. For the body, it is not divorced from the conditions, technologies, and life processes that make it possible. To start from the body means to move from the vulnerability that constitutes it, the fact that it is always open to other bodies, to different sensible matters, human and non-human, and mutual dependence, making each one a being outside itself, allowing politics and the social condition of interdependence to be constructed. Today, it is precisely the technique of what unacknowledged dependence that creates the starting point for a new body politics, beginning with an understanding of human dependence and interdependence. Bodies rise up on the material and symbolic plane, on the local and global plane. In the face of the overwhelming market power and the crisis of classical institutions, there are bodies taking up space, not afraid to play on different and strategically effective fronts. Even claims on the right terrain, for example, never just demand democratization or inclusion in established political forms, but rather request imagining and building different institutions so that another kind of singularity and community becomes possible. The feminist perspective has always been characterized by the capacity to assume and claim that what is most personal about bodies is already political. The biological body is never alone or self-sufficient. It is always a fragile, vulnerable medium, a vehicle of communication, an instrument of circulation, a passage between an anatomical reality and a symbolic projection. If bodies did not have an anatomical structure, they could not survive the traumas they experienced. Staying in the world, it is not a given. It needs constant and an adjustment work and purposes, an exit from the self, the assembling of a terrain existing between the biological and the symbolic, the body and the flesh of the world. It is in this constant transition between the singular and the common that bodies become a political means, in a struggle that measures their effectiveness without entering into a mortal wars, because it cares about life. It is a form of witness through life. I quote here the artist Claire Fontaine, our friend. The feminist strike is its new form of practical cartography, not as a single event, but rather through a communal process. Its force is now the order of the day. Thank you.